Right. How are you doing, Andrew, in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania?
Oh, how are you doing?
Good. Good. How are you?
I'm fine. I guess my question, I'm not sure if it's a question, explanation, but I believe the more people are skeptical over the supernatural. The reason why is that modern theories of knowledge are still caught up in Aristotle's logic, even though his science is out of date. And yet his logic and his science seem to go hand in hand.
What did you say on that last part?
Oh, his science and his logic seem to go hand in hand.
Science and logic go hand in hand.
Yeah, he developed his logic based on his science.
We developed logic based on science?
No, he did. He developed his logic based on his science.
His logic. Is there different types of logic?
The scientific method, as we know it, didn't really get worked out until, I believe, 17th century, give or take.
I think there's a difference between codifying it and actually recognizing that people use it in their own lives all the time. I mean, we observe, we test. You couldn't really learn about the world around you.
Yeah, in a way, but I mean, having a scientific method that was actually systematized led us to a huge acceleration of discoveries of the modern world, basically.
Correct. But I think all discoveries, almost, unless they're accidental, come from the idea that somebody sees something, they start putting things together, they make assumptions about it, they try it out, and then if it's like, if you repeat it, then you tend to start thinking that it's correct, even if that's not necessarily true.
But if this guy's going to say that Aristotle's science is out of date, I think nobody in the world would argue with him. But, heavy objects don't fall faster than light ones, it turns out. So what?
Oh, that's my point. Yeah, no one would argue with that.
Therefore, there's a God?
Still uses logic without question, which would be, the principle of non-contradiction.
So do you advocate using irrationality and illogic?
No.
Okay, so you advocate for logic as well.
No. I believe
so
they're important laws.
You're not in favor of non-logic, but you're not in favor of logic.
Well, his laws are important, but they're not the most basic.
Let's move away from Aristotle. I think we would agree that we're in a new age or whatever. There's certain ways of learning about the world around you that work, and certain ways that don't, regardless of who is tied to those ways or not tied to those ways, or who might have done it incorrectly or not as well as someone else. So let's just look at the idea of how do we learn about the world around us? How do we gain whatever we would categorize as knowledge about it? And I guess my question is, would you agree that a logical approach to understanding the world around you would yield the most accurate results?
Of course.
Okay, I was making sure we're on the same page.
But do you accept the principle of non-contradiction?
Sure.
Okay. Would you believe that's the most basic of all laws?
I don't care.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not sure where you're going with this, but kind of word wankery like whether something is basic or not seems kind of a sidetrack to.
I mean, if you're asking if we're down with the laws of logic, I would say that's probably a safe assumption.
Yep.
So you have to understand the laws of logic before you could have a full comprehension of the whole world.
I'm skeptical of a word like understand them. I think they're kind of unavoidable, and I think, for example, my cat adheres to those laws without really understanding them. Would you?
Yeah, they're self-evident.
They're unavoidable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
But there's another law that he didn't incorporate that we kind of ignore. That's what I'm getting at.
Okay,
and that is?
It's implied by the principle of non-contradiction, but we don't readily recognize it.
Okay, what is this thing you figured out that the rest of us are still blind to?
Well, it was popular in the ancient East as well. It's the unity of opposition. I talk about this in my YouTube channels on Rational Belief in God.
Okay, well, we're not watching that channel right now, so can you sum it up?
Yeah, well, if we look at contradictions, they're based on propositions. And propositions consist of terms. So what's even more basic than propositions, which lead to contradictions, are the terms that propositions consist of. So if we look back on the elements of a proposition...
what has any of this got to do with concluding that the supernatural exists?
I'm getting there.
Well, let's break it down. Let's make an example.
I'll put it briefly. The problem with Aristotle is with opposites.
We're done with
he only
Aristotle.
recognized-
We agree with you that that
let
he
me get
wasn't
to it.
reliable.
I can't fully develop my question if I can't explain it.
Okay.
I'll do it briefly. It won't take long. But he basically only recognizes physical opposites as being interdependent, which would be like correlations, double, half. You know, if you see something double, you could recognize that it consists of two halves. They're physical opposites. All other opposites he didn't regard as interdependent.
If you see something double, you regard that as having two halves?
Well, you know, you could conceive of the two halves that make a double.
Well, so if there's two Tracies, that's like two halves?
No, let's put it this way. There's two of you. So when you regard say you have a twin.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're doubled. So each Tracie would be a half.
No, cutting me in half would be two halves of a Tracie.
I mean, of the double of Tracies, the half of it would be one Tracie.
Andrew, I got to be honest.
Wait,
I'm
are
not
you saying
convinced.
that one is half of two? Like, is that what we're saying? Like,
Well, and here's another one.
I
want to be honest here. I'm
take
not
one.
convinced that you're going anywhere with this.
Here's another one. This is okay. Parent offspring. There would be the parent. Then you, when you see the parent, you would, and the child would be the offspring.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree.
So that they're correlated, and that's the only one. It has to be something that you physically recognize.
About
There's
how
the
many
opposite
more
sex.
minutes would you say it's going to be before you start talking about justification for
I'm-
supernatural stuff?
I'm good with kind of letting him
Well,
go
here's
for
the
a
thing.
bit.
Like all what I'm getting at is all opposites are interrelated because you can't even have knowledge unless you recognize that fact. And
They're subjectively
instance-
interrelated. Do we agree with that? Would you agree that they're subjectively interrelated? Like, we make the association that the genetic connection between the parent and child is meaningful, correct?
right.
Okay. Just making sure.
Now that's what he limited to being interdependent. But even like something like day, night, you know, good and bad would be interrelated because you can't even recognize something bad unless you know what would be good.
I don't necessarily agree with that.
They're conceptually interrelated.
You could have like a baseline of just sort of normal and then realize something's worse than that and have like a bad versus just a normal.
Yeah, I mean, hot and cold are technically opposites, but cold is just a label that we've given to less energy. There is an absolute zero of energy, and you could say that is the coldest thing even if there were no hot things.
Well, yeah, it's just a negation. Well, everything's made up of heat, but cold would be just a negation of the heat.
Okay, so supernatural stuff.
All right. Well, where was I? Well, okay.
So subjective. We have these subjective values of cold and hot, and
Well, here's a clear example. Like,
Okay.
imagine everything being daylight 24 hours, 7 days a week, and there's no variation of light. You wouldn't have a concept of day without having anything to contrast it with.
Can I throw down something just to see if I can maybe help here?
Please.
There's in Taoism, when I read that, there was something that basically what they would say is like there's Tracie and then there's everything that's not Tracie. And everything that's not Tracie is sort of like what they're considering the other half. And so whatever you have everything that's not that. And basically this is their perspective, as I understand it, of like the law of identity. I don't know if that's what you're getting at or not, but it sounds kind of similar.
It's sort of like that.
Okay.
Well, here's what I was leaning to. Well, there's also, if we didn't regard like the opposites, things and their opposites, all we would have is non-sequiturs. We wouldn't even know. We wouldn't even recognize things.
I have a problem with opposites, though. It's not really when you use. And here's the thing: it might not be. You may not be incorrect in what you're describing, but I think when you use the word opposite, it has a Western connotation that isn't quite what we think of in terms of the Eastern use of this. So, for example, when you say an opposite, right, you're using examples like hot and cold and dark and light. But when I look at the Taoist concept, it's Tracie and not Tracie. So
Tracie,
it would
did
be,
you become Taoist on me in the last
No,
few
but I'm
weeks?
just explaining the concept here. What they would say is, for example, this mug is part of not Tracie. It's not like it's not that there's an opposite of everything. It's that there's things that there is what it is and there is what it isn't. It's like the law of identity. And so when you use the word opposite to try and explain this, I'm afraid it's going to confuse the audience.
Well, to know who Tracie is, we have to know who Tracie wouldn't be.
Right. But some
Exactly
people
right.
would have a problem with the word opposite because they look at conceptual opposites like hot and cold, light and dark, and it's not quite the same thing.
But we have to comprehend the opposition.
We have to comprehend what it's not. We have to comprehend what it's not, and that is different than people think of opposites. So you have to be careful so you don't confuse people. I think I understand what you're saying, but I'm just saying that using the word opposite can be confusing because people have a Western view of that is like these conceptual things, hot and cold, and it's not that.
Well, you have to know anything, you have to conceive of its contingency. You have to
of what it's
at
not.
least know what it wouldn't be.
You have to know what it's not, or else you don't know what it is. Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily agree with that either.
So we're in agreement.
If you
on
can't tell something from what
They're
it's not, how would you know what it was? If you were not able to tell me from this mug, how would you know
Go
when you're
on.
looking at Tracie?
that. So conceivably, they're interdependent. You have to know what something is.
Well, these are laws of
what
logic.
something
Things
is
are
not.
what they are, they're not what they're not. I mean, that's part of the laws of logic that we agreed to earlier.
Okay, well, that's a component that wasn't incorporated into his laws.
Okay.
So according to him, only those correlations were interdependent, but conceptually, everything is interdependent, opposition-wise or negation-wise.
If you want to identify things, correct.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So the reason why I brought that up, okay, that clears up the logical side. And now on the scientific side, what he believed, the reason why he believed that was based on his science about correlations, whereas everything has to consist of matter and form.
Andrew?
In fact,
I'm being serious here. Can you give us some idea of what this has to do with concluding that there is supernatural stuff in the universe? I mean,
I'm gonna leave the
every
God.
time I've asked this question, you've changed the subject, and I'm thinking about
leading to
hanging
it.
up.
I'm leading to it. Now
No,
we're going
no,
into
no.
science.
How long is it going to be before you actually get to a point?
I can get it done in like 5 minutes.
What?
5 minutes, he said.
5
minutes.
minutes? 5 more minutes of this? I'm not
says
sure I'm
give-
willing to go through 5 more minutes of this.
Okay, according to Aristotle, everything.
Is there
consists
any
of-
way you can sum up the next 5 minutes and actually get like maybe give us an end view of where you're going and then circle back to the way that you get there?
Well, the whole synopsis would take 5 minutes to describe.
Okay. Well, then
I mean,
try again later.